Hey, I'm Jeffrey and welcome back to the channel. Now today I want to talk about an idea that has had one of the biggest impacts on helping to ensure that I actually end up doing the things that I should be doing. The stuff that is the most valuable, the most meaningful items that make their way onto my to-do list. Things like journaling, exercising, meditating, and even creating these YouTube videos. And that idea is the difference between motivation and discipline. For my entire life, I had not really given much thought to the difference between these two concepts, or even linked them together. I had figured that if I should be doing something, then I had to spend my time and energy trying to figure out a way to make myself feel like I wanted to do it. That I had to work on getting myself motivated. I had to get pumped up to take the action. I just assumed that wanting to do something was a prerequisite for actually doing it. I had foolishly thought that if I wanted to write, then I would need to think of ways to make me feel motivated to write. And if the motivation didn't come, then I would just end up not writing at all, not realizing that there are a whole host of things in life that I already do without feeling like doing them. I have to get up at 4:30 in the morning for work, and I can tell you that rare are the days that I actually feel like getting out of bed at that ungodly hour in the morning. But I do it anyways, day after day, without fail. So why is that? I wasn't able to appreciate the difference between these two ways of doing, between motivation and discipline. But while I was watching one of Ali Abdaal's SkillShare classes on productivity, he gave me a new mental model that completely changed how I looked at it. His lesson was based on an article entitled, "Screw Motivation, What You Need is Discipline." I'll put links to both the SkillShare class and the article down in the description below for you guys to check out. Now, the idea is that you can think of motivation as being this kind of roundabout path to go from an intention to an action, to a should to doing that requires you to feel like it, whereas discipline allows you to go right to the action without that feeling. For example, if you want to start meditating, you have the intention, but you wait to feel like meditating before you actually do it. And then unsurprisingly, waiting for motivation means that you find yourself struggling over and over again to do it consistently. However, if you just ignore how you feel and do it anyway, then that's discipline, and that will make sure that you meditate much more regularly. Now, there are a few things that I would highlight about this. Like I said before, we already use both models in our everyday lives. For things like work, we show up even if we don't feel like it. But to pick up a book and read, we wait for the urge to strike us. We wait for the mood to descend. But when the option is usually to read or to watch Netflix, I find that reading is going to lose that battle 99 times out of 100. So we need to think of another way that other than relying on motivation to get things done. And what we fail to realize is that motivation is not the prerequisite to action. It's the byproduct of it. Action leads to success, and that success generates the motivation, which leads to further action. So we need discipline to kind of kickstart this whole process, to kickstart the cycle. And then you find that over time, you need less and less discipline to actually sustain it. So if we can just get started with doing what we should do, with what we need to do, with what we would find meaningful, then we will have more motivation than we could possibly handle. It's so interesting that the thing we chase, that feeling of want, would come to us if we just ignored it and got busy with the doing. But instead we search high and low in every nook and cranny, trying to find motivation and never really coming closer to getting it or getting it consistently. In the book, The War of Art, Steven Pressfield talks a lot about how a good indicator of whether or not an action is something we should actually be doing is how much resistance we feel to doing it. This is where we need discipline to ensure that we are doing meaningful work and that we're making the highest contribution to our well-being. So why do we naturally find ourselves taking the discipline path for some things and not for others? This is where I updated the mental model to factor in consequence. The reason I get out of bed at 4:30 in the morning for work is not really reward driven. It's because there will be a real and almost immediate consequence to not doing so. The cost of not taking the action is greater than the friction of getting out of bed. So now the mental model looks something like this. We start with an intention, and then we ask ourselves if there's a consequence. If yes, we just take action. If no, then that's where we feel like we need the motivation. We ask ourselves, do we feel like doing this? If yes, we go ahead and do it. But if not, we end up with inaction, with not doing the thing we should be doing. So in this model, discipline is really about realizing that inaction has consequences. It's very easy to see this when they are immediate and not within our control. If I don't show up to work, then I don't get paid, no matter how much I might want to earn a living by sleeping in. When consequences are long-term, or more about failing to meet our full potential, then we need to be much more purposeful in how we apply discipline. If you don't exercise today, nothing bad is really going to happen right away. So I need discipline to get me to show up when the motivation just isn't there. And internalizing this mindset has become somewhat of a superpower, because when I'm struggling to do what is valuable or what is meaningful, all I need to do is remind myself that I don't need to feel like doing it. It's just that simple. And that's usually enough to get me to go do it. But like with all superpowers, there's a weakness inherent in this mental model that I did not really appreciate at first. Discipline has a kryptonite, and there is a dark side to this force, and that is applying discipline to vague and ill-defined goals. So let's say you have the intention that you want to eat less. Now, that's not very clearly defined. It's giving you a direction, but really has no criteria that lets you know when you've been successful. So you get to work using discipline, you cut your calories down to 2,000 a day, but because you don't have that shut-off valve, you think to yourself that you need to have even more discipline to get that down to 1,500 calories a day. And you rinse and you repeat, and the indiscriminate application of discipline gets you to the point where it's no longer sustainable. So you rebound back to where you started, and then you feel guilt, you feel shame, you feel like a failure. You think that there's a problem with you and your character, that you're lacking in discipline, when really the problem is that you didn't set yourself up for success. You didn't have a very well-defined, clear goal to begin with. So imagine if instead you set a target of 2,000 calories a day. Now that is clearly defined with criteria for when you can turn discipline off. So when you reach that goal, you can feel satisfied with your progress and prevent exhausting your limited discipline supply. And you can prevent yourself from triggering a shame cycle. We need to be aware that when we have a goal and we're using discipline to achieve it, if we find ourselves struggling, the very first thing we need to do is not to just keep trying over and over again and then piling on the self-judgment when we don't live up to our standards. We need to be aware that when we have a goal and we're using discipline to achieve it, if we find ourselves struggling, the very first thing we need to do is not to just keep trying over and over again and then piling on the self-judgment on top of that. The first step is to take a step back, show ourselves some compassion, and then reevaluate if this is a realistic goal, if it's achievable, if it's even actually what we want to achieve. If the answer is no, then we realize that we don't need more discipline. What we need is a better goal. If I reflect on my own journey, the example around how much to eat was the situation I found myself in a couple years ago. I had a goal to lose weight and eat less. And I remember for a while there, I was only eating around 1,500 calories a day. And I was finding it not very sustainable. And I remember thinking that if I went back up to 2,000, I would be such a failure, even though I could have lost weight just as well by taking in that many calories. Had I set the clear goal at the beginning, then I could have saved myself a lot of the mental anguish and still end up achieving what it is that I wanted to get out of it. So the thing we need to realize is that discipline really just thrives in the realm of actions. It's what we need to get us to show up and do the work that needs doing. But it's not as effective in the realm of planning or goal setting because it can lead us into the trap of setting unrealistic targets. And there are 3 thoughts that I would like to summarize and leave you with. The first is that we need to set clearly defined goals for ourselves with targets that prevent us from overdoing it. Next, we need to rely on discipline instead of motivation to get us there. And last, but maybe the most important point of all, is that if you find yourself struggling, take a second to step back and do a reassessment before you start reaching for more discipline and piling on the self-judgment when it isn't working out. So thanks everyone for watching, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time.